Well, hello again. We're going to finish up 15 here, the Truman years. It says 1945 to 1953, but I'm calling an audible. I originally said uh, that we would talk about the election of 52, because that's important. But that really belongs to the 1950s. So why don't we just cross this out, and I'll put it at the front of the lecture for the 1950s. It'll flow better that way. I don't know why he stuck it here. Probably just to make this lecture a little bit longer. So Wells just stop with the election of 1948, and we'll get to the election of 52 when we do the big long lecture that basically covers most of the 1950s. So we'll just put the election there. So really, all we got to cover then is D, because I get covered A through C. So let's talk about D. Whoa, let's go forward here. Let's go to erase. Or it carries forward on the next one. Alright. Election 1948. Alright. So remember, Truman is an accidental president. Nobody elected him to be president. He was Roosevelt's running mate. So, right there you're starting off at a bit of a disadvantage. Okay? Alright. But he served basically all of Roosevelt's fourth term except for like the first 3 months. Okay? So he's got 4 years in office. Okay? So Truman will go ahead and run for election. I won't say re-election because he wasn't elected to be president, but he's going to run to stay in the office, okay, in 1948. Now, some things that Truman might not have going for him. All right, he doesn't have the charm and personality necessarily of Franklin Roosevelt. Okay. Second, the Democrats have been in power for 16 years. Three terms of Roosevelt, one term of Truman, and eventually at some point, you just get tired. You get tired of Democrats. You get tired of Republicans. You think the other side deserves a chance. And Republicans have done well in the 1946 midterm elections. So it's looking like 48 might be a good year for the Republicans, a chance to get back into the White House. Okay? All right, but Truman will go ahead and run for election. Now, let's talk about some things going on in 48. Okay. Well, so there's really no surprise who the candidate's going to be. Somebody probably ran against Truman for the Democratic nomination. I mean, it's just almost always somebody, but I know he is the sitting president, so a little rusty on that one. So anyway, it takes out a lot of the excitement at the convention. So something comes up at the convention. A guy by the name of Hubert Humphrey. His name's there on the picture. Okay, Hubert Humphrey, who's I think like mayor of Minneapolis or something like that. Not a big time politician, but he gives a speech at the Democratic convention saying that the Democratic Party needs to start distancing itself from the Jim Crow policies of the South. Okay, because remember the South is basically a one-party state. It's basically everything's run by Democrats. All right. And Humphrey is like going, and Humphrey's like going, man, maybe it's time to start thinking about civil rights. Maybe we have fallen behind on that, and maybe we've been distracted by the New Deal, and then the Depression, the New Deal, the World War II, and Roosevelt had made some inroads on this, but Humphrey's a champion of as the science is champion of human rights. Now this would certainly irritate a lot of the Southern Democrats who tend to be more conservative and tend to be set in their Jim Crow ways. Okay? So that can cause a problem. Another thing that probably didn't endear Truman to Southern Democrats is Truman will desegregate the armed forces. As Commander in Chief, he orders an executive order that will stop the segregation of the armed forces into black and white units. That probably ruffled a few feathers down south as well. Okay, so what's going to happen is Democratic Party will experience a split. Okay, yeah, it should be the next slide. Yeah, this guy named Strom Thurmond. Okay, who's from South Carolina, where all the weirdness always seems to happen. Hello, Fort Sumter. Okay, uh, Strom Thurmond will run as a splinter party of what they called sometimes the Dixiecrats. They're the Southern Democrats. Okay, way down south in Dixie. Okay, so they're Democrat ideas, but they tend to be big states' rights advocates. States' rights meaning less federal intrusion. This is like an anti-New Deal thing. But of course, another part of states' rights is we have our social traditions down here with the Jim Crow laws and stuff. All right. So our happy-go-lucky Democratic Party has kind of splintered. Okay, this doesn't normally work out well for you. Look at the Republicans in 1912 and the Democrats in 1860. All right. So couple of pictures. I think there's some pictures here of Strom Thurmond. There he is. He's in the Senate for a very, very long time. Too long. Thank you very much. I'm going to skip over a bunch of things here I'm not worried about. Okay. The Republican opponent is Thomas Dewey. We met him back in 1944. He ran against Roosevelt. So it's Dewey is back. Okay, he's taking another shot at it. It's looking like it could be a good year for Republicans, as I said. The Democratic Party is kind of fractured. Southern Democrats are threatening to vote for Strom Thurmond because they don't like some of what this new talk of civil rights is coming out of like people like Humphrey. And remember, Truman had that Civil Rights Commission, and so a lot of the polls are saying, man, it's looking like Dewey's got it. Okay, there's even a political cartoon I've seen. It shows like Dewey and Truman looking at a billboard that's got a bulletin board. It's got the poll results on it. And Dewey's like, well, we don't even need to hold the election. Okay. Truman, by the way, is running on a platform called the Fair Deal. Remember, Theodore Roosevelt had a Square Deal. Franklin Roosevelt had a New Deal. So Truman's got to have a deal. He has the Fair Deal. Book talks a little bit about it. I'm not going to expect you to know the particulars, but you can read about it in the book. Okay. There's Dewey. This is about victory speech. All right. So campaigning. So anyway, they go ahead and have the election because you kind of constitutionally mandated. This is a very, very famous photo. The results are starting to come in. Remember, we don't have computers back then, really. Newspapers have to, set their type and get the newspaper printed early in the morning, like right after midnight, in order to get it into the paper boy's hands to be on your porch at 6. So we're looking for the early results coming in, and the Chicago Daily Tribune prints this headline: Dewey defeats Truman. Anybody know who this guy is with a big smile on his face? Yeah, it's President Truman. He wins the election. The newspaper's wrong. So I want you to keep this in mind. Is that one of the things you may have picked up on in this class is to be skeptical of things you hear in the news. I'm not saying it's all lying, because it's not, but sometimes there's an agenda, or sometimes they're just wrong. And you get this now with this 24/7 news cycle with the cable networks. They have to keep the news going all the time, and so things coming out with this. One of the primaries we had a couple months ago, I was like keep tracking the results, and the polls have been closed for like 30 minutes in some. I don't remember what state it was. Like 1% of a vote was in, and the press was calling it for Biden, who I think did end up winning. That's not the point. It's like, could you wait till I don't know, half the votes are counted? Is that too much to ask? And for God's sake, stop calling the election while the polls are still open on the West Coast. Could you do that for me, please? All right. If people in California are still voting, don't go on the news and say, well, it looks like, blah, blah has won the White House. It's like, what? People are still waiting to vote. Rant mode off. Because sometimes these people are wrong. There is no President Dewey. Okay. We get President Truman for 4 more years. Okay, he'll be president until 1952. Actually, January 1953, if you want to split hairs. But we're done with the domestic part here. Now, there's other things going on. I'll give you the text of the chapter to read, but most of what we're going to talk about Truman will be in the lecture on the Cold War. As I said, there is the election of '52. I'm just going to move that. Instead of calling it audible, I'm going to move it to lecture 16. That way it ties in with all the 50s. Will be tied up in a nice, neat little bow. Okay, more or less. All right. So we're done with this one. Have a good day. Remember, read your textbooks, tip your waiters, and don't get coronavirus.